Spoiler warning, the following is an in-depth analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. It's generally popular opinion that it's a smarter idea to choose an unknown or relatively unknown actor to play a really well-known or iconic character, especially a superhero or major comic book character, than to go with a huge A-list actor. Either choice is primarily made out of fear. Stars are chosen when the studio or the filmmaker is afraid the property can't stand on its own and needs that recognizable actor to sell the project, and lesser-known actors are chosen when they're worried the audience won't be able to look past that recognizable name and see the character they're trying to create. I tend to go with popular opinion on this one. When in doubt, find the guy or girl that has the acting chops, looks the part, and can become your hero. Take a chance on the property. If you've got the right story and the director with the vision to bring it to life, all you need is great advertising to get people into the theater. Sometimes having that huge name can be a signal to the audience that your movie doesn't have any legs to stand on, that it's just a star vehicle. It worked for Superman. As unsure as both the studio and the Salkinds were about whether it would perform without a big star, that movie set the precedent. It had a great script, a director who knew how to get the audience to take the material seriously, and an actor in Christopher Reeve who could make us see Superman rather than an actor playing Superman. It also had a fantastic advertising campaign. It's impossible to be sure, but it's hard to imagine that film having the same impact on movie history if one of the big-name stars who was considered had actually been in the title role. People like Clint Eastwood, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who actually tested for the role, Muhammad Ali, and yes, even Sylvester Stallone. There are obviously exceptions to this rule. People laughed at the idea of Michael Keaton in a batsuit, and in his 1989 Wild Wild West parody song Adam West, Wally Wingert made fun of Keaton, saying that Batman is now Mr. Mom. Keaton was known for comedies at that point, and it was hard to imagine him doing a dark and gritty Batman after playing roles like Beetlejuice. But that casting worked. I mean, it's up to personal opinion whether he was a great Batman or not, but it worked in that it sold a lot of tickets, because he was playing against type. You weren't thinking, oh, it's Michael Keaton, not Bruce Wayne, because he wasn't doing what we'd seen him do before. Robert Downey pretty much is the closest thing to a real-life, walking, talking Tony Stark, so that's one of, if maybe the only time thinking about the actor himself while watching the movie actually works. It didn't matter that he was known, although he had been out of the spotlight for a while before that, because it was like casting Tony Stark as Tony Stark. And although I will freely admit I was one of the naysayers when Chris Evans was cast as Captain America, because he had already played another major Marvel superhero, he again played against type and showed how versatile of an actor he is. When I see him as Captain America now, he embodies the traditional 1940s honor, chivalry, and patriotism of that character so well that I actually have to remind myself that he played the Human Torch. And sometimes you can get away with hugely popular actors when they've got so much makeup on they disappear inside the character anyway, like Ron Perlman as Hellboy. The reason these exceptions work is because those popular actors were chosen because they really were right for the parts, not because they were so popular. Often with these choices, the filmmakers realize they're taking more of a risk going with a big-name actor, but they do it because they feel it complements what they're making, instead of just trying to sell tickets on a name. Some of the most notorious comic book movies have been star vehicles, and they all have a few things in common. The movie isn't as much about the title character as it is about the top-billed actor. A lot of the film's budget goes into getting the star rather than making a great movie, and that big star is the only actor of his or her caliber, or in some cases, his or her fame in the film. So they stand out like a sore thumb against a lot of lesser-known talent, because that's either what the movie could afford, or it doesn't want the star outshined. We've got The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where Sean Connery was paid $17 million of the film's $78 million budget, and then there's Catwoman, where it almost doesn't matter that it was a Halle Berry star vehicle, given that the role she was playing wasn't even the Catwoman we're all familiar with. And possibly the most infamous, Steel, a star vehicle for Shaq, who has the distinction of being 50 times more famous than anyone else in that glorified B-movie, and also not being able to act quite as well as any of the rest of them. Judge Dredd falls squarely in that star vehicle category, a movie much more about Sylvester Stallone than it is about the title character, and it both doesn't work and didn't perform for all these reasons. Stallone wasn't right for the role because it's casting to type, or at least the way the script is written, it's casting to type. This is one of those movies that's written for a star. The character wouldn't be so different from the source material and wouldn't have the eye-roll-inducing one-liners and catchphrases if it weren't for Stallone. The two biggest problems with going this route in trying to sell a comic book movie is that A, the fan base for the source material wants to see a faithful interpretation of Judge Dredd, not Stallone dressed up like him. And of course that fan base is admittedly a lot smaller than your ultimate target audience, which for a big summer blockbuster is pretty much everybody. And B, Stallone fans have a lot of better movies of this type to choose from. If you want to see a futuristic sci-fi action thriller filled with social commentary about the world we live in today starring Stallone, what Stallone himself calls the action morality film, watch Demolition Man. It has similar themes, though it focuses on more of the social aspects of a society run with complete governmental control. And you could argue which of these is more of a dystopia, but Demolition Man, while an action blockbuster where lots of stuff blows up and includes a two-dimensional bad guy, is more thought-provoking and actually explores its ideas. And this isn't a Stallone film, but for an action sci-fi thriller that explores the dangers of cloning and eugenics, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film The Sixth Day is a better effort than this movie. And trust me, that movie's got its own problems. The most popular complaint against the film seems to be that Stallone's Dredd takes his helmet off, when the sacred rule of the comics is that in order to symbolize the facelessness of the law and to characterize Dredd as a man who has completely transformed himself into an ideal, Dredd's face must never be fully revealed, even in those rare instances where he must inevitably take that heavy, cumbersome thing off. As I always say, straying away from source material doesn't automatically ruin an adaptation or even make it worse than the source material. I think Iron Man's turning Jarvis into an artificial intelligence instead of a stereotyped butler was a stroke of genius. But it's risky, because the fans will cry foul if it doesn't strike them as even better than what was originally done with it. And the purists will cry foul anyway. Now, with Judge Dredd, I'm not familiar with the comics and have only done some rudimentary research in preparation for this review. But even knowing nothing whatsoever about who Dredd is supposed to be before I watched this the first time, even I could see the obviousness of why this was done, and it wasn't for a story reason. When we first see Dredd take his helmet off, it's done in an extremely dramatic, over-the-top reveal, perhaps even in defiance of the original concept. I suppose director Danny Canton decided if he had to sin, he'd better sin boldly, because Dredd not only takes his helmet off, but the way the camera pans around him and the way the score's percussion billows, it makes a really, really big deal out of it. Like it's saying, your comics had Dredd, but we've got Stallone. Nobody cares about Dredd, they want to see Stallone. I mean, look, he's not even wearing the helmet on the box. Stallone's name's on the top, Judge Dredd's name is on the bottom. I guarantee you the Dredd DVD and Blu-ray will have Dredd over Carl Urban's name. His name probably won't even be on the front of the box. And so this sets the tone for the entire film. I'm going to get into the story and its themes, but honestly, this movie isn't really concerned with all that. I mean, you can say it's about too much power in one man's hands, about whether swift justice and fair justice can really be mutually exclusive, about the dangers of overpopulation, about eugenics and playing God, and the characters throw those ideas around, but it's really just about how cool Sylvester Stallone is in action movies. Because if it was really interested in exploring those social themes and giving us some thoughtful social commentary, the plot wouldn't be truncated into an hour and 20 minutes. I'm not exaggerating. Maybe one of the shortest live-action major motion pictures I've ever reviewed. And that's not to say you can't tell a story in 80 minutes. You can absolutely tell a character-driven, intimate sort of story in that amount of time, but this movie pretends it's an epic and has a shorter running time than Defendor. And I don't even want to call it ambitious because it comes off like adapting source material it doesn't really understand to shoehorn into a familiar action formula. This is what Judge Dredd tries to do in just 80 minutes. Establish a futuristic society where the Earth has been ravaged by wars and millions of people are packed like sardines into megacities while the rest of the Earth is uninhabitable. Establish a rule of law where street judges play judge, jury, and executioner, focusing on the greatest and most legendary of them all, Judge Dredd. Give Dredd a character arc, spiraling from a past about his being forced to kill his own best friend for breaking the law, whereby he starts shutting out all human distractions and commitments and comes to learn that the law he worships is not flawless and that his lack of sympathy for those he judges borders on a disregard for human life. Explore the breaking down of the justice system as block wars and riots consume the city. Introduce a conspiracy plot where Dredd is framed for killing a TV reporter who calls him out for being too harsh in the way he deals with criminals. Send Dredd to the cursed Earth where he crashes on his way to prison so he can see how the Hicks there live. Reveal to Dredd and the audience through Judge Fargo that his best friend Rico, who he thought he killed, is still alive, that they were both cloned to be the perfect judges, that Rico is basically a failed experiment, and that he's trying to bring the eugenics project called Janus back in a conspiracy to take over the entire justice system. Create an epic struggle between Dredd and Rico showing the opposite sides of the same coin, two different philosophies at war with each other, the law versus human ambition, which plays out so quickly that Rico literally has to spell out their two philosophies in case we happen to blink or take a swig of Coke and miss it. He says to Dredd, "You destroyed your life to embrace the law. I destroy the law to embrace life." Nothing wrong with those being the opposite philosophies. I actually rather like that. But had the movie taken its time to explore these men and not just tell us what they're about, that line wouldn't have been necessary. Without that hammed exposition, I'm not sure I could have gotten that just from Rico's cliched supervillain plot. And just for good measure, it throws in Rob Schneider as the plucky comic relief and a pointless romance with Judge Hershey that isn't even clearly supposed to be a romance until the last 60 seconds of the movie. You just can't do all that in an hour and 20 minutes without coming off like one of those YouTube abridged shows. You know, where somebody takes the most important bits of a TV episode and edits together a 6 or 7 minute version so you can get all the cliff notes in case you don't have the time or money to track the full version down for yourself. In fact, this feels like a clip show of an entire season of television. Doesn't that all sound a lot more like a season arc than a story for a movie? At the end, the justice system is in shambles and a new council has to be put in place. But Dredd, who has apparently just gone through a character-defining arc, refuses to be the Chief Justice because he's a street judge, even though there's no real leadership besides him after 108 judges in the entire council have been killed. As far as I can tell, this is only in there because Dredd refusing to be promoted to Chief Justice happened in the comics, or Chief Judge as it's called there. So this movie, that calls into question the very ideals and principles Dredd stands for, with Chief Justice Fargo asking if his 7 summary executions at the beginning of the film were really necessary, and the insufferable Fergie, played by Rob Schneider, constantly claiming he had to break the law to survive a block war when Dredd arrests him right after he gets out of jail the first time, and ends with Dredd kissing the love interest to prove he's grown and is embracing humanity while simultaneously returning to the streets business as usual. How can he reevaluate his convictions while simultaneously ignoring the fact that there is no law right now and no one to put a new set of rules in place, really? I mean, unless they make his new girlfriend Hershey Chief Justice, but we're not told that's going to happen. You'd think maybe the old system that created clones, made you, lied to you about it, produced not just an evil clone, but a regular council member in Judge Griffin who helped the evil clone in his conspiracy, maybe that needs an overhaul? Maybe it's a bad omen when that whole thing falls apart, telling you that giving men and women the power of judge, jury, and executioner needs to be rethought before you just go out on your own and start arresting and shooting people again. And at the very least, just for the sake of practicality, I mean, your building is in shambles and there aren't enough people to run the jail you'd have to put those people in, or any oversight without a council to check you when you, I don't know, commit 7 supposedly necessary summary executions. Or maybe he's planning on going rogue and becoming a vigilante. Who knows? Though that would certainly throw everything he apparently just learned about humanity out the window. What I can't figure out is how what Judge Dredd goes through would lead to his wanting to be less hardened. At the beginning of the film, he's constantly saying, "I am the law!" Translation, I am the law. By the way, it's not a good sign when half the film's supporting characters in the film are making fun of the way he says that. Again, the movie's stupidest ideas seem more stupid because it draws so much attention to them. Not playing the strategy here. Hershey tells him he doesn't have to be alone, like he thinks he does, and she explains that she has a personal life, so why can't he? Dredd says she's only been on the street for a year, and after a while, she'll become just like him, because that's what the job does to you. He tells her he had to kill his best friend, and that's why he can't afford to have friends. And here's a side note before I continue this line of reasoning. I have a hard time buying that this place would be run so much like a regular police station. Wouldn't the system require its judges to be more like Dredd, to completely devote themselves to the law so as to not have distractions or personal motivations that might entice them to abuse the immense amount of power put in their hands to arrest and sentence at their own discretion? I mean, sure, there's a rule book that tells you exactly what sentence goes with what crime, but at one point Fergie tells Dredd, "Haven't you ever heard of extenuating circumstances?" To which Dredd replies, "I've heard it all." He has the power to make the call on a case-by-case basis. And if he believed Fergie had to commandeer a public droid to stay out of harm's way when the world was exploding around him, he could have made an exception and not sentenced him. But the idea is that Dredd doesn't care what the reasons are. He's the complete opposite of his brother. The ends do not ever justify the means. And so he sentences like a robot would, coldly, matter-of-factly. And I could see the argument that maybe the Force doesn't want such close-minded robotic judges for that very reason. A compassionate judge would take extenuating circumstances into consideration. The only problem with that is that everyone aspires to be just like Dredd. They think he's the best at what he does. And at the very least, this system shouldn't allow fraternization in the workplace. It seems like a really bad idea to let 2 people with that much power in their hands to date, and in fact, in the comics, that was the rule. Anyway, I digress. To get back to what I was talking about earlier, Dredd's brother Rico is a monster. He does terrible things in the name of wanting to be human. He destroys the law that Dredd loves and most of the people who dispense it. He says that he's justified because he doesn't want to be like Dredd. He doesn't want to give up living life in the name of the law. Dredd thinks he's completely wrong, and at the end, Rico loses, all the while trying to create a new race of clones based on his DNA and who are all just like him. And sure, Dredd discovers his life is a lie and that the people he's always served lied to him, not telling him they genetically engineered him to be the perfect judge. But just because Dredd thinks they were misguided about genetic engineering gives me no reason to assume he no longer believes in the law he's always fought for. He's still very reverential toward Fargo, who is his father figure, who his clone DNA is based on, so he basically is his father, and who started the Janus Project in the first place. And he's dying under the scales of Lady Justice, no less. And again, at the end, without even considering that perhaps they need to go back to square one before they start dispensing justice again, given the circumstances, Dredd just goes back onto the street like it's business as usual. So I don't see how his arc leads him to have more compassion and be less robotic in how he perceives justice. If anything, dealing with Rico should reinforce his original ideal, unless the idea is supposed to be that he's found some kind of middle ground, that he can't be like Rico, but that his own ideas were oversimplified at the beginning. But everything ends so fast I can't be sure of exactly what he's taken away from all this, except that dating Hershey, who he never seemed especially romantically interested in before, is a good idea. The movie also presents ideas without fully explaining them, or just simplifies them to the point of absurdity. I'll give an example of each. Perhaps I'm missing something, but I don't understand why anyone would willingly become a judge in this reality, or how they could possibly seem like such calm, regular people like most of these judges do, given what they're asked to do at retirement. But it seems like the idea is, when a judge finally retires, which apparently just happens whenever they feel like it, given that Judge Fargo can just declare retirement. We're not told they're forced to at a certain age and he's getting up there. They have to take the long walk, to take the law into the cursed earth. The nearly uninhabitable part of the planet, that's where they go. So they're exiled from civilization into the hot desert, and their only consolation is that they'll be written on everyone's hearts and memories. That's their reward for years of dedicated, honorable service. I don't get it. Someone explain to me why anyone would want to be a judge when that's what they have to look forward to in old age. Then you got Dredd's trial, where both the way Hershey tries to defend him and the way he's ultimately convicted are obviously and laughably oversimplified. If you're going to make a movie about court and law, you should really do your homework and make it sound a little better than this. Otherwise, your characters come off like idiots. So, video evidence is presented showing someone wearing Dredd's armor killing the reporter. The prosecution acts like that's all the evidence they need to make a conviction, even though the footage is really grainy, the audio quality is not very good, and someone trying to frame Dredd could just make a fabrication of his clothes and wear them. Then Hershey is played up like a genius for calling the evidence inadmissible because the quality is too bad to make a positive ID. Duh. The prosecution's evidence is ridiculous. No judge in a modern court could make a ruling based on just that. But everybody there is like, oh man, I wouldn't have thought of that. Wow, she's good. And Dredd even tells Hershey how impressed he is with her. Then the prosecution brings in new evidence that makes the whole thing crystal clear for the judge and leads to Dredd's conviction. His DNA is on the bullet that killed the reporter. Okay, fine. Until we find out whose DNA it really is. Rico's. He and Dredd aren't identical clones, and their DNA is based on Fargo's. So couldn't they have just as easily deduced that Fargo was behind it? Now, I realize the whole thing is a sham designed by Rico and Griffin to get Dredd out of their way so they can take over the judicial system. But they had to convince a lot of people with that DNA, and I think it's too easy. It would have matched more than just Dredd. I think that's sloppy. Maybe I'm reading too far into it. And come to think of it, wouldn't you expect the lawgivers, the guns the judges use, to be programmed to only respond to the assigned judge's DNA? Nope. Otherwise, we can't have all these moments where one judge picks up another judge's gun and starts firing it, so we get this ridiculous rule of only a judge can fire a lawgiver. Any lawgiver. That lets Rico pick up and fire lawgivers because he used to be a judge. Maybe he only used old ones that are still reprogrammed with his DNA. I didn't really catch if he ever picks up a newer one. It'd be really stupid if the judges never reprogram those things, and I'm surprised with some of the technology they do have that they can't download information like that automatically into every gun in the city. Then again, it's a future where we can easily clone, but we can't build flying motorbikes that work right, so who knows. At any rate, in the comics, only a particular judge can use his own lawgiver. They should have put that in the movie, too. Also sloppy are the plot contrivances that lead to Dredd getting back into the megacity. He just happens to be seated right next to Fergie, the Jar Jar Binks of this movie, just so he can have a sidekick and we can theoretically have something to laugh at, though I never do. He's obnoxious, unlikable, unfunny, and switches sides at the drop of a hat, really only staying with Dredd to the end because Dredd clearly becomes the winning side. And between these two, Dredd is funnier. There are like 50 guys on this transport, and the last person Dredd sentenced is the guy he sat next to. What are the odds? Weirdly, Fergie questions this too, saying just that. What are the odds? But it doesn't make it more believable just because characters in the movie are questioning how stupid it is too. And it's unclear as to whether Rico and Griffin somehow planned the ship to veer off course so the Hicks and the Cursed Earth could shoot it down just to make sure Dredd would get killed. Griffin orders the rest of the officers left alive after the crash to kill Dredd, but I don't know if this was just a happy accident, given that the pilot says they're adjusting course due to weather, and I don't know how Griffin would know those Hicks were definitely gonna shoot them down. Again, really lazy contrivances just to give Dredd things to do after he's been written out of his own movie for 15 minutes. I don't mean to nitpick, my point is this is all badly organized. There are also several video game moments that strike me as hackneyed, like the sky chase toward the end, where Dredd has to time it right so he flies through a billboard that opens and closes at regular intervals. Where else but a video game do you see stuff like this? Are people flying through that thing all the time? Wouldn't it be cordoned off somehow since it's a major flying hazard? Is it malfunctioning, or is it supposed to do that? And even though the special effects seem to take precedence over everything else, besides making a big deal out of how awesome Sylvester Stallone is, the credits do something really bizarre. They put the credits of the special effects designers' names so large that it's hard to really see their special effects behind them. These are the most complex and long shots of the city in the movie, and it's covered by the names of the people who created it. Worse than that, there are no credits over the constant reaction shots of Rob Schneider it keeps cutting to. Why not put the credits over Schneider's face and let us actually see the shots of the city? Honestly, this isn't really a superhero movie at all, given that Judge Dredd is a judge among many, although he technically has powers, given that he's genetically engineered and he's supposed to be the greatest of them. But it seems like the people making this movie didn't get the memo that it's not a superhero movie. It's got all the cliches, a really over-the-top villain, it's got a damsel in distress at the end, it's got stupid, heroic catchphrases. Man, did I get sick of hearing Dredd say, "I knew you'd say that," and it's a save-the-whole-city-from-supervillain takeover plot. It even has a climactic fight on top of the Statue of Liberty. How many times have we seen that? This should have been a smaller, more personal story for Judge Dredd, really focusing on the political intrigue and the pluses, negatives, and social implications of the kind of justice Dredd dispenses. I think the story of Dredd having to kill his own best friend itself would have been better for the screen. I also don't see why the cloning thing needed to be a big conspiracy. Not knowing Dredd's old best friend is really his brother does nothing for his arc and just muddles things. The genetic engineering commentary could have been there, but not in the forefront. There's no time to make huge statements about both. And isn't it more fun and interesting to explore these people's world and let that exploration bring about the commentary rather than immediately blow that world to smithereens so we can drive home how wrong it is? There's really very little going for this movie for me, beyond some decent aesthetics and some okay production values. I also thought Hershey was well cast, if not handled right. It's not offensively bad like Catwoman, and sometimes elevates to the so bad it's nearly good category. Still, I'm afraid I can only score Judge Dredd a 1.5 out of 4. Next time, join me for a review of Superman Brainiac Attacks. Bye.